Hello, and happy Juneteenth to you. I want to say welcome to Eastville Community Historical Society's For the Culture show, where we celebrate preservation, history, art, and the community. Today, we are so happy to be here on June 19th, 2024, and celebrating Juneteenth. We have a very special guest here in the studio, Dr. Jarvis Watson. He is the Chief Diversity Officer at Columbia. And so today he's going to give us an address and really talk to us about what it means for Juneteenth today, what it means historically, and how we move forward in celebrating Juneteenth. So, with that, I'd like to introduce to some Dr. Jarvis Watson.
Thank you, Doctor, and it's a pleasure to be here on Happy Juneteenth to you
Yes,
as
happy
well.
Juneteenth.
And it's just an honor for me to not just be here, but to actually represent Juneteenth and the legacy that has benefited so many people. So I'll just provide an address that I just did recently, and we can get into a conversation later. So,
Absolutely.
all right, all right. So, like I said, my name is Dr. Jarvis Watson. It's a pleasure for me to speak to you all today, and like I say, we're gathered today to celebrate the legacy of Juneteenth and the legacy of being free in America as Black and African Americans. As you all know, Juneteenth is a recognition of Union soldiers arriving on a plantation in Galveston, Texas on June 19th in 1865. This regiment was led by the Union General Gordon Grange, and his orders were to announce to the people of Texas that slavery was over by way of the Emancipation Proclamation. This Emancipation Proclamation was established in 1863, as we all know, by President Lincoln. However, when they made the announcement at the plantation, it was 2 years later in 1865. Just to let you know how many people were there were 225,000 enslaved Africans that were freed and liberated that day, the equivalent of state, uh, three MetLife stadiums. If you're a football fan, New Jersey or New York in that particular area, three football stadiums. Imagine what it was like for people to one find out, but also to move toward freedom, and how much chaos and how much turmoil might have been taking place, as well as the elation of knowing that you were finally free. So just a mix of emotions. This provided freedom to those enslaved Africans who were part of an American and international Atlantic slave trade going back to 1619, at least in America. And now we celebrate on a national level, having Juneteenth celebrations, which includes family reunions, barbecues, strawberry soda, red velvet cake, which is one of my favorites, parades, and other traditions. Um, and just by just asking a question, like how many people actually really knew about Juneteenth prior to this national holiday? It's really something to ask ourselves in regards to what we would like to see in education or in our elementary and secondary schools to really understand a little bit more about American history. Like I said, I have to admit that the son of two parents that attended a historically black college and university and who were always educating my sister and myself about black excellence, black history, black awareness, and understanding how we were established here in this country, but also how we were resilient in this country. I didn't know about Juneteenth until about 4 years ago. In the same way that African Americans were not told that they were free after 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, American education and history failed to share the story in my elementary and secondary education. I had to ask myself, why was this not shared? Why was this not emphasized? And how relevant is that to what we are experiencing today? And another question I asked a group of individuals a couple of days ago, I said, did we all believe that slavery was just in the South? And people, they said, no, it wasn't just in the South, it was here. But did people know that New York was one of the largest areas of enslavement north of Maryland at that particular time? Something I didn't know until I started doing some research about Juneteenth. But I knew that these numbers were there. Long Island has some hidden stories as well that I want to look deeper into as I start to do more history research. I was reading a book referred to me by Dr. Georgette Greer Key called Long Road to Freedom. It chronicled the legacy of African Americans in New York from slavery to freedom. I actually attended Stony Brook University, and I stayed in various dorms on campus. One of them was named Mount College after William Sidney Mount. Thanks to this book, I found out more about who was a famous artist. But I briefly looked into his history and found that he actually had a large family and a large farm. They actually had enslaved Africans, and he actually talked about in one of his writings, describing the character of an enslaved African named Anthony Hannibal Cat. Within the same book, I learned that slavery officially ended in New York in 1827. Slavery was legally abolished in New York on July 4th during that particular year. So we have two Independence Days, I guess. However, forced servitude of the children of formerly enslaved individuals continued for at least another decade. It wasn't until 1830 that the census reported no enslaved Africans were in Long Island. Did you notice that there were similarities with the Juneteenth in regards to how we found out 2 years later, or at least how the Texans found out 2 years later, and how there was still this stretch of slavery still going on, even though people were considered free. So I just wanted to wrap up by saying, even though we were in this really, I guess, tumultuous and I guess mixed with the elation of being freed time, people were resilient and move forth and develop their own way of being free. So some were given land by their former owners. Unfortunately, some had to go back into bondage, and some like indentured servitude and worked as sharecroppers. Some were able to buy their own property. Churches were developed, primarily AME churches and Baptist churches, which I was actually AME when I first grew up in, and now I'm actually a Baptist now. Some enlisted into the army to fight against the Confederate Army, even though they were considered free. I think the movie Glory emphasizes that. Education systems were established. Some of the first black women educators came out of New York, Brooklyn, and Queens to be exact. Actually, the first female principal came out of Brooklyn, I believe. And before the 15th Amendment, this is really key. You could not vote unless you owned $250 worth of taxable property. This actually was removed for white people, but not black people and women. The 15th Amendment made it possible for black men to vote, but not black women. And if you watch the opening scene in Selma, you realize that even though women and men had the right to vote, there were barriers to set up to deter or block people from voting. Things like literacy tests, poll taxes,
Yeah.
all white primaries, singing the national anthem, or singing the state national anthem wherever they were, or state song, whatever that was. And sometimes we had to sing it backwards. These were just a few things that were barriers. However, there were also things called black codes that made it difficult for black people to own land or property, which is really connected with the 15th Amendment. But here we are, speaking to you all today to know that if you just have a community, a sense of purpose, desire, and hope within your heart, you will, and a plan, and as well as people that are there to help you, that can serve as allies, you can make it, and you will make it. But we still have a long road to go. But I'm just really grateful for those who have paved the way for us today.
Yeah. Well, I think you said so much. Thank you for that summation of Juneteenth. You said so much, and I've taken down some notes, and I have some questions. For one, you talked about the abolishment of slavery in New York State, which is 1827.
Right.
And yes, we see in the census 1830, but we still see that there were laws that allowed someone who was coming into New York State with enslaved persons to be here for 90 days,
Yeah.
and all they would have to do is leave and come back in. So even though we see in the census 1830 is the last, we still are now finding evidence that there was so many nuances in the law that we too can celebrate that 1866 date, 1863, because until then, it was totally abolished.
Right.
Because there were these loopholes that happened. And coming up in 2027, we are celebrating freedom from the 200 years of freedom in New York State. So that's something to keep our eye on
200
as
years.
well. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's coming up, and I've been working on the commission for that. But you said so much about Juneteenth, and I think it's important that people may ask, who can celebrate? You told us what Juneteenth is, but who could and who should be celebrating Juneteenth?
Oh, no, great question. That was actually asked yesterday to me. Some because the statement was like, "Well, it's not my holiday, so why should I celebrate it?" And I think what we have to realize that Juneteenth. This is what a good colleague of mine actually. His response was great. Dr. Zebulon Maletsky.
Mhm.
He said, "You have to realize Juneteenth is on one of the only holidays that we actually talk about slavery."
Mhm.
So I think this aspect of how we always are remembering other tragedies and other aspects of human bondage or human or inhumanity on certain groups, that here in America is something that we kind of gloss over, something we don't talk about. And I think the fact that we're talking about slavery and we're talking about the coming out of slavery is really synonymous with what's going on in a lot of other countries right now.
Yeah.
A lot of people are being forced against their will to live in conditions that are definitely unfavorable. And this aspect of inhumanity
Yeah.
is being placed upon them, and it's making it easier for people just to kind of turn a blind eye. The more we talk about things like Juneteenth and the the ironic aspect of being free but still being in bondage, it makes you look at other situations and be empathetic to what their situation is. When you teach these courses in, like, let's say, like in high school or elementary school, we can say, well, okay, what is Juneteenth connected to in other aspects globally? And now students are starting to see this aspect of freedom and liberty on a global scale, but also if they become, when they become leaders and when they become decision makers, they can say, you know, I have a reference
Mhm.
of Juneteenth in America to understand what we should not be doing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then maybe I can take the same message to, let's say, Israel and what's that, Gaza. I
Mhm.
can take that to the Congo. I can
Mhm.
take that to other places where people are really being in living in adverse conditions. I can serve as a peacemaker. I can serve as a diplomat. I can
Mhm.
serve as someone who can advocate to say my heritage and people that came before me went through similar things. I don't want to see that happen to you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so what kind of geopolitical things can we put together? What kind of diplomacy can we instill just based off the fact that we're learning about what happened in our own backyard?
Yeah, it all starts off with a conversation and a talk. And I too, I have the sentiments and have said previously as well that this is a holiday for America because this is American institution
Yeah,
of slavery that happened, and now we're celebrating the freedom. But I do think that there has been some misunderstanding. I've been celebrating Juneteenth for many years, and I will say that I'm starting to see the diversity join in celebration, and I'm so happy that the diversity is because again, this is American history,
yes,
but this is
yes,
looking at the ending of slavery, and everybody should celebrate that. And for the most part, this is the first real recognition from the federal government and others that slavery existed. It was something that was sanctioned by the government, by our laws. You talked about black codes
yeah,
and things like that are still with us. If you look at the 13th Amendment, you see at the 13th Amendment there still is a clause for slavery and prison system. You'll see that that's still there. So we still have to overcome,
yeah,
but it's unpacking all of the things that have been done for centuries. So just as Juneteenth is a new federal holiday, it didn't happen overnight. I think unpacking and having these difficult conversations needs some time to permeate.
yeah.
So I have another question for you. You did bring up school curriculum, and you're an educator at heart. You've been, employed at Stony Brook. You've been employed at the School of Visual Arts, and now Columbia. So you're a consummate educator. How do you see teachers being able to teach Juneteenth?
Oh, great question, great question. Wow. And I just also just point out that he said 200 years,
Hmm.
at least in New York.
Yeah.
And I think overall, like, it's not too long, it's not so much of a gap between when slavery happened to when we are free right now. So I think if you go into the classrooms, I think to have like a timeline
Yeah.
to help students understand a little bit more about, hey, this is not too far, far,
Because we
far.
have to throw in there that 100 years of Jim Crow and segregation.
Yeah,
See, people
yeah,
forget that, and,
yeah,
and if we think about the Civil Rights Act of 1866, it's a whole century later when we think about the modern day civil rights movement of 1954, of the 1960s and
right.
1968, that we're still, the 1866 clause it covered that, should be universal freedom, but it didn't happen because of the backlash. So there was 100 years. We don't see things like fair housing into 1968, a separate unequal. So there is such a long line of history. I think the timeline
Yeah.
would be the thing to show. Some of our parents are, were active. Then some of our, I'm Generation X,
Oh, yeah,
so so we have
generation, yeah.
family members that were around 60 and this happened. So it's not too far away from us that we're still feeling the effects of it now.
I think it would be a great thing to add to the curriculum because, like I said, you have timelines. We can have these artifacts. Definitely working with a historical society to bring in artifacts and to really show students like these are things that were in place. Especially if we show them like housing covenants, and some housing covenants are still on the books, but
Yes.
they're not being exercised in some states. Some states they are, but you can even show them like, listen, this is in writing, and lets them understand a little bit more about the conditions that let's say Black folks are in, if it's within an impoverished kind of situation. It's not something that is genetic. That I'm just born to be in this particular situation. They can see a
By
system, design that has been placed upon individuals, and then now students can say, well, what is this design or this system that everybody when we were coming up with Generation X was like, yo, the system is working on us, a system, and it's like the system was like you couldn't really put a finger on it, but now that we're in this day and age, we can say the real estate or system, you can say the education system, you can say COVID definitely blew up the aspect of healthcare
in a big way.
the disparities in healthcare. I know my wife would definitely be happy that I brought that up. But this aspect of even wealth and to be able to be more aware of how to have generational wealth as opposed to generational poverty is something that people are starting to become more aware of now. So I think there's these links that people can connect, that there was a system that was placed upon individuals called slavery. And then when he got out of slavery, there was this new form based off the amendments.
As James Baldwin said, by another name.
Oh man. You can't go for Juneteenth and not bring up James Baldwin. Yeah,
I'm telling you, you read some of his work and it feels like it's happening today. But we don't have a lot of time. We can't cover it all in one show.
That's another show.
But I definitely have. If you have one more statement, but I want to find out because I think you're leading to this. Is now that we have this federal holiday, now what? What's the next step? What's next?
You know what? For those who are still that have survived through that Jim Crow era, and then even into the civil rights, it'll be great to get some more oral recordings. I'm just thinking about my mom who still lives in the place where she grew up, to see that the cycle of life, so to speak, and just to get her original thoughts and original recall of what happened during that particular time, and to see where she is now, and to say, are we going backwards or are we going forwards? So I think it's really important that people get out and vote. Just talk about moving forward. I just want to make sure I add that last part on as far as education. But with that, having all the information, now you're a more informed individual. So when you go to the polls, I think it's important that you understand that when you vote, there are certain folks that you want to have in that position to make the laws and to make the policies that are going to favor having a more
a just society,
a just society, a liberated society, an equity. I want to make sure I put that in equity-minded society, because we're all equal in God's eyes. But however, the things that we get and
there are barriers.
The starting places that we are at, the barriers that we have, don't allow us to move in the equal.
Well, let me interject something else, because this is where, when I think about what's next, I'm having the conversation about reparations. This conversation often provokes, very different emotions, but I think we have to talk about it. I think that some people are so scared that, they're going to financially pay for it. It doesn't have to be financial, it could be many forms, but I think having the conversation is important. So many other ethnicities have gotten paid for the bondage and the wrongdoing that's happened to them. And it's about time that African Americans have this conversation about reparations and what that looks like. So if you could quickly touch on that, I'd be happy.
I'll be happy to say, I would say it probably takes place in 3 different forms. As an educator, I got to start with education. How do we make education more affordable
Okay,
for the descendants of those who came from enslaved
I can check
Africans.
that box too.
Okay. The second thing is, how do we create more earn your leisure type of conversations? You know, I'm shouting that particular group out because they have done such a great job on Instagram, helping people understand how to be financially literate. So how do we have more of those type of conversations embedded in our curriculum for our students? Definitely, once again, for those who are descendants thereof. And I think the third thing is being able to go back to the 40 acres and a mule.
Okay.
Where's our land? Where's our where are those promises that that we were provided, and how do we check those boxes and say, hey, we got receipts. You said we're going to provide these things, but what other things can we look back into the records to see what else was promised to us
Yeah.
that we have not received yet?
Yeah.
And I think we need to hold this country accountable for that. So
Absolutely, and I think I'd interject too. Recently in the talks, I sit on a subcommittee for New York State. It's actually called 40 Acres and a Mule.
hey, how about
So I sit on that committee, and one of the things that have come up is the fact that what about genealogy? Many African Americans cannot name their great grandfather, and definitely not their great great. You know, thank God I'm fortunate that I can name my great grandfather. I have images of him, and we see him on the records, but for so many that's just a devastation that we can't say, especially where we're sitting today, where I meet people who say I have 11 generations, I have 13, and I have 7. Many of us can't go back that far, so I think that that's something that needs to be talked about too,
I would love that.
and maybe incorporated in what reparations can be. It could be a combination of things, but we're never gonna get to an end if we can have a conversation from a pure sense of the point of let's have a discussion and not coming to wanting to take something off the table before we get there.
I'm totally in agreement because you know what? I do know, but at least back to my great grandfather, at least on my mom's side, on my father's side, I have no idea. But to have that understanding of who you are, where you come from. I mean, I did Ancestry.com and realized that I have some European and some African
Of course.
backgrounds, but like where did those lines tie in? And am I linked to something that as much as I may not want to know about my history, I need to know.
Yeah.
Because that gives you strength,
Yes.
gives you power, and also gives you this insight of self
Yeah.
that no one can take from you. So
Yeah.
I'm, when that door opens up, I'm definitely at the table.
Yeah, add that to the list, right?
Yeah.
Well, we have a few more moments. So briefly, if you want to leave us with any closing statements about Juneteenth.
Like I said, like I didn't know about Juneteenth and until like 4 years ago, and the fact that it became a national holiday so fast, it was great. But for me, I feel like
It depends on who so fast, because if you talk to Mother Opal Pearl, who was
Yeah.
the mother, it didn't take us. It didn't happen so quickly.
Well, at least
it's
within-
50 years in the making.
I know, at least within the time that I found out. I'm
Yeah.
saying that, so that's something different. Like for the time I found out what it was until it became.
Yeah.
So no respect to the sister. What was it?
Opal Pearl.
Opal
Pearl.
Pearl.
Opal Pearl.
Opal Pearl.
Lee.
No disrespect, man. But I think there's this desire to find out more about our narratives,
Yeah.
to own our narratives, and to find out if Juneteenth is one thing. Because one thing, just also doing my research, there were Juneteenths in other states.
Oh yeah.
There things were happening at different times, even based off the fact that the country was split between those who have slave states and those who have free states.
Yeah.
And so, looking a little bit more into these 50 states about what were the living conditions and working conditions and just being conditions of those individuals, I want to know more about that. But I think to know that America has so much history here that I think once we find out a little bit more about how things were set up, it'll make more sense about what we don't want to see moving forward. And I think that would bring a lot more people to be more civically engaged, more culturally aware, but also being that much more determined to establish themselves as Americans here in this country. So don't always stay curious, always stay hungry, and do not accept what someone just gives to you. Go a little deeper.
Yes.
And for those out there who want to write those stories, start writing. Become
That's
authors.
right. That's right.
Just like my friend here. Tell the story. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It was so much that we could not unpack in this short time. I'm starting to think about the Emancipation Proclamation, and the fact that I always tell my students that, remember, that was an executive order. So,
Mm.
depending on who you speak to, there wasn't consensus even built around the Emancipation Proclamation. It was a singular act by Lincoln, President Lincoln, decided to order for the territories.
Yeah.
So it didn't happen immediately other places, as you said. But I also think it's important. What I tell them is because you can find other things that President Lincoln did in the history that we don't like. But as a society, we have to give grace, and we have to allow someone to evolve in their thinking, their understanding, and their knowledge. And I think this Emancipation Proclamation is part of him evolving and listening to the people around him to say, you have to do this. They're at our union lines.
Yeah.
They're sacrificing their lives. They're also helping with the efforts of the war. Had it not been for, African Americans in the Civil War, I know we could go on to another show, but had it not
Yes.
been for the sacrifice and the life and people who were on the front lines
Yeah.
of the Civil War, we know that the story could end very differently. Even if you think about someone like Harriet Tubman and her new history coming out, that she's the first woman to really command an army. And so this history is so vast, but we only have this short amount of time. But I think we need to come back, and we're going to
Yeah.
have to unpack some of these things, including Reconstruction. That also matters for Juneteenth.
Yes.
So there is so much, and I thank you for being here. And we're gonna do this again because we have to.
Yes, and just call and I'll be here. And I'm loving the fact that you are chronicling this conversation to help people become that much more aware, but also that much more curious to go find out things on their own. So thank you for everything that you are doing and everything that you do outside of this place to make people aware of Black history and American history here in Long Island and throughout the world. So
Thank you so much.
yeah.
And so with that, guys, we thank you for joining us for this segment for the culture. Eastville Community Historical Society, located on 139 Hampton Street in Sag Harbor, New York. And as you begin to celebrate Juneteenth, we want you to remind you that this is an American holiday and that we welcome you to come down to LTV tonight and join us and visit us on our website, visit us at many of the events that we have scheduled. And we too want to say happy Juneteenth to you. Have a great day. Bye.